Hello and welcome back to the Drop Step podcast. I'm joined by my good friend and hopefully summer league buddy. This is what we've been chatting about pre-pod. Chuck of the Chucking Darts podcast. And Chuck, we were saying the real life stock market is in ruins. It's as volatile as ever. So we have to turn to different means to sort of make our money or make our clout, I suppose, in our circles. And we're returning to the world of the NBA stock market today. Are you ready to sort of give out your best NBA investment advice and how are you doing in general, man? Excited for today's episode?
Certainly. Thank you so much for being so generous, both for inviting me on and for your flexibility in scheduling. I'm not the easiest person to schedule with all the time, but I am very excited to do this. We did this last year, and I feel like the picks we made when we did this a year ago are doing pretty well. So happy to take another crack at it.
So I listened back to that episode because I'm on Easter break at the moment. So I have oceans of spare time, which is absolutely lovely. So I got to hear us talk about Denny, Avdia, Josh Giddey, Jalen Johnson. I can't remember who was your first guy from last year.
Amen.
That
I
was
know
it.
I had a men on there.
Amen. It's just we've knocked it out of the park. So hopefully 2025 is not sort of a second season slump. But do you want to get us kicked off today? Who are you talking about? I suppose before we do that, here's the premise. We are talking about guys who we think their stock will be highest in a year's time. Sort of, they will have the greatest rise. They will be the best investment. So we are not saying you should invest in Shea Gilgeous-Alexander because he is the equivalent of investing in Microsoft, Apple, probably not Tesla anymore. But essentially, that is your blue chip stock. It's going to be expensive. It's going to give you returns, but there's not a lot of like theoretical money or theoretical clout to be made. Whereas what we're looking to do is sort of be a little bit early to the table and highlight some guys that we think by next year, for some reason or another, their value in NBA terms will have skyrocketed. So I'm very excited about my five guys. Chuck, you've got five guys as well. Do you want to start us off with maybe the one that you're most passionate about, or whoever you're just most excited to talk about today?
Sure. I'll start out with Matas Buzelis. Now, like this exercise where, as everybody knows, you hear that sort of stock terminology and nomenclature
Mm-hmm.
a lot, being like, buy stock now, buy stock now. But, usually it's saying things like, I mean, I don't even know. Shea Gilgeous-Alexander, buy stock now, when it was
Yeah.
like December. So, I mean, in terms of actually getting ahead of when guys really pop, that's what I view this sort of exercise is doing. Guys whose stock is relatively low compared to where it's going to be a year from now. And that is sort of part and parcel with the fact that rookies in their second season almost never get considered for the most improved player award. I think that is wrong. The idea is that you're supposed to expect improvement in your second year, which is true, but I also think you should expect improvement in the third year, fourth year, fifth year. I think guys should always be getting better. And I think Amen Thompson should be considered for the most improved player award this year, but he's not gonna make the ballot, which is unfortunate. So I could do 5 rookies, on
Yeah.
my list.
Yeah.
Because stock stock prices do not know yearly bias. It's just if your stock rises, it rises. But I restricted myself to 2 rookies. Buzelis is the one I'm most passionate about. So Matas has been really cooking recently. For those who are just sort of passingly aware of who he is, he's the Chicago Bulls first round pick. He's been starting for them for a little over a month now. The Bulls are making their yearly play-in push, and I think are now locked into the play-in. They'll either end up as the 8 or the 9 seed, depending on the results today. And that's where they end normally. It's where they ended during sort of the latter Levine and DeRozan years. And so I think that Buzelis nationally is still under the radar a little bit because people think it's the same old Bulls. And that's fine. But if you watch them, he will stick out both in his play, both in sort of like how he looks, because he's, you know, a legit 6'9", 6'10", with like real bounce, and for sort of his play style, where he has a very dexterous, diverse driving package. You know, he can bump guys with his shoulder, even though he's skinny, and he can sort of switch his finishing angle as he's taking all these steps. Almost everything he does is some version of a Euro step, but he puts as much creativity in his upper body as he's doing that as he does with the lower body. You know, most Euro step players in the NBA, when they do a Euro, they're really only using their lower body to wrong foot the defense or create more space. And he uses every part of his body to do that. And he's so lanky and so long that it really sticks out visually when you watch him. And it's also very, very hard to stop. And that that driving ability was the best thing about him as a prospect. But since he was in the G League last year with Ron Holland, who went ahead of him in the draft, it was everything was kind of masked because that G League team was such a disaster, and his shooting numbers were not very good, and his passing numbers were not good. He still gets tunnel vision on his drives, but he's a rookie. And when you drive as well as he can, I'm okay with a little bit of tunnel vision early in your career. And his shooting numbers have really come up. I mean, for the year now, he is shooting 36% from three on about 3.5 attempts per game. And that's over 79 games, but he's only started 30 of them. And so in this period when he's been starting, that 3-point volume has been up. And he's still, again, technically over the course of the full season, he's only averaging a free throw and a half a game. That number is up over the course of his starting career here, this sample of 30 games. But I think over the next year, that free throw number is really going to go up. And if you can hit 80% of your free throws and get to the line, you know, 4 times a game or more, your efficiency just tends to really start to swell. And, you know, as a rookie, his efficiency is just under league average. I think it's around like 56%. I think league average is around 57. And that is extremely encouraging because he's never going to be a worse NBA player than he is right now as a rookie. And when you're trying to think about who is going to really, I guess in sort of more casual terminology, become a household name, get more notoriety, just become more impactful as an NBA player and scorer, you do have to look a little bit to intangibles. And Buzelis has the personality and the aggression in his game to seize NBA possessions and NBA usage and to make something good out of them. And that is, as an evaluator, a mistake I've made was like, for instance, I loved his teammate in the draft, Patrick Williams, because I thought he was so selfless and he, you know, was known as this defense first player, like zero ego. And he's, you know, built like Kawhi Leonard. And it's just, he's just going to build his offense year over year. And I don't want to spend time, you know, disparaging my lovely Patrick, but suffice to say that his personality was never aggressive enough to actually seize offensive possessions. He is so wired to be a supporting, connective player that that's all he ever really tried to be. And so that keeps your ceiling in a league that prioritizes offensive efficiency, offensive innovation so much. Someone who's just not wired to seize a lot of possessions, they're not going to get much. And that kept Patrick's ceilings low. Matas is the other end of the spectrum. Anything on an NBA court that he perceives he is going to try. So I think that means he's going to become a much better passer, a better finisher. And as a defender, probably the second most projectable skill of his coming out of the draft, if the most projectable was his driving, was his hand placement when he's defending guys driving into him. He just has a very uncanny knack for blocking without fouling, for, you know, stripping the ball when he tries to stunt. If someone tries to drive into or through him, which is tempting because he's skinny, he just knows where to put his hands to disrupt like the ball placement and disrupt the drive. Not unlike how Chet Holmgren does it, but Chet is just 7'1" instead of 6'10". And so, that this past 2024 draft was disparaged all the way through. None of these kids were really going to get a fair shake coming into the league. A lot of them were going to be doubted. And now Buzelis, I think, has a skill set and has a play style that sticks out both in terms of its sort of novelty. It sticks out for its novelty relative to other draft classes. Like there's no one really like Montas Buzelis in this year's draft, but also for its value on the floor. Like there are not many, I know the term unicorn has sort of aged out of legitimate lexicon now. I mean, people still use it, but they're incorrect in using it. But the idea is that you can help protect the rim on one end and stretch the floor on the other. And Matas can do that. He is a supplementary rim protector with how many blocks he gets. Just in his last, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 games, he has, I think, 15 blocks, nearly 2 a game. And he has been hitting his threes. And so just for that alone, that makes him sort of like a clear starting modern power forward right now. With those skills plus his ability to drive and finish. And because of that, match that with the personality, he's just going to become a better and better and better starter until he reaches his ceiling. And that ceiling to me is an all-star player. Now, I'm not saying he's going to get there next year, but for the next year, you are really going to see his rise. And I think he will have, hopefully, if the Bulls can hang the banner and get out of the play-in for once, hopefully you see some moments over the next few weeks in the play-in and in the first round of the playoffs, because he's not going to be scared of the moment. If there's one thing about Matas, he wants every wisp of smoke that he can inhale. So he's going to be a lot of fun to watch, and he would be my number one guy to sort of raise his value from now until next year.
Yeah, this was a guy that was in the dunk contest his rookie year. This is a guy that was calling out Zachary Risacher before the draft, saying, no, I could smoke you one-on-one. So I think you're absolutely right, Chuck. And you were talking about this with regards to Conkanipple, with Brian on your most recent podcast. And it's just that wanting the touches, wanting the usage in order to develop. There's sort of this known thing of, you have to have the bare bones to sort of stay on the court to develop, to get your minutes, but then you also have to sort of embrace those minutes and take the usage that you can get. And I think that in terms of his offensive environment, it's really, really suited his game this year. Playing next to Josh Giddey, who's happy to spread the ball around, playing in such an up-tempo system. I think we've probably avoided some of the issues with like playing in the half court where he might not be able to barge guys out of the way. Playing in transition, he's been able to show off that finishing talent that you sort of spoke about with the creativity, with the Euro steps. I remember he had like a 10 for 10 game earlier in the year against Miami as well.
Yep.
And yeah, the shooting has really come around. 56% from 2-point range in his last 20 games, 39% from 3-point range. And I was going to say, not to really rub it in, I watched the highlights from the Bulls Cleveland game the other day, because I saw that Matas had 5 assists, and I was like, wow, oh my God, he's passing too. This is something special. Something's happening. And like 3 or 4 of them were for Patrick Williams. So if he is performing Jesus style miracles, getting Patrick Williams scoring touches, getting Pat in, in that offensive flow, I really think that the sky's the limit. But if we're not saying unicorn anymore, I like the term funk. I like funky players. I like players that perhaps just bring something that's a little bit different to the table. And Matas is one of these players that's going to be able to sort of stuff the stat sheet, stuff your team full of these supplementary skills, like the sort of ancillary rim protection, like being that transition threat. And if that 3-point shot comes around and the body gets a little bigger, I like how ambitious you've been, saying like that all-star ceiling. And yeah, he might not be a player that gets there next year, but I have just started to notice like the NBA Twitter account is posting Matas Buzelis now at a fairly alarming rate. So it seems like the groundswell is there for him to sort of have a little bit of a rise in profile.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm being like pretty forceful here. Like I'm trying not to be like a talking head screaming my head off. But if you were to ask me now, if
Yeah.
I could, like, I did a redraft recently with Trill from Ball,
Mhm.
and we did it alternating picks of twos. We did it in doubles because I wanted to illustrate sort of how many different cases you could make in this draft. So he took the first two picks, and my first two were Ron and Matas, sort of as like a nice convenient talking point since they were so
Yeah,
maligned out of
sure.
the G League. But like if it were just me and I were redrafting the entire draft, Matas would be my number one pick. That is how good I think he is going to be, and that I think he
Nice.
is. Because you have to remember the Bulls, yeah, they cleared out Levine, but they're the Bulls. They're always trying to win.
Yeah.
As foolish as some may think that is for the long term, like you're not, and Billy Donovan's a serious defensive coach. His teams always over or outperform their defensive expectations, and this year's no exception. So if you're going to play for them, it's because you earn your spot. They don't really gift many minutes. And Matas is not like, he's just very important to them. Not many rookies just earn a starting spot. Like Risache, for example, kind of was given a starting spot at the beginning of the year because he's the number one pick. And to his credit, he has, I think, done a pretty good job holding on to it despite some ups and downs. But Matas was not a starter and is now clearly a starter, and no one is unseating him. And just to the point about the assist that you made, I think I think it is in the NBA game one of the more projectable developments for a player is to go from like a below average passer to an average one, which is
Yeah.
what I'm basically projecting for Matas, which is really a significant jump. It's hard to go from good to great in anything because the competition level is so high. But to go
Mm.
from below average to average with all his other skills is going to make a real difference. And the reason why I think it's relatively easy to develop that skill is that since every team is trying to play five out and get their center out of the paint to clear driving lanes, if you have a talented driver like Matas is, the passing windows are just going to be wide open. And so he will have lots of reps where his passing reads are relatively easy. And so through that, his assist numbers will start to creep up. He did have 5 assists against the Cavs. And again, in his last 8 games, he had another game with 4 assists and another game with 6. So it's all sort of like I didn't expect it all to arrive this early, frankly. And I think you can view the fact that it's happened in March. You can take that with a grain of salt, obviously, because it's not like the top competition. But productivity is productivity, man. I mean, just
Yeah.
you mentioned the shot coming around. He is since, let's see, since last maybe 15 games or so, he's
Mhm.
getting up like 6 or 7 threes a night. I mean,
Yeah.
that is like real deal volume if you're 6'10". So that's something that I think elevates him over Ron. And I had Ron, number 2 in the draft coming into the year. I had Ron above
Mm.
Matas, but that sort of offensive precociousness and productivity, like it just that intangible stuff matters in draft circles. I think some people are reluctant to put a big uh to put much into intangibles. Some
Yeah.
people do it, but other people are like, well, you can't really quantify those. We want to utilize metrics and all that kind of thing. But they really matter. And Matas has the ones that matter. That is some of his greenest flags, which is just how he approaches the game. So I'm
And
all the way in on Matas.
yeah, he can have some of the more embarrassing 3-point misses that you'll see on a night to night basis, where if he misses, there's a higher chance than for most players that it might be an air ball, that it's way off. And it doesn't matter if it's the next possession down the floor, he's getting it up again because it's just sort of the right decision to make. So if he can iron out those inconsistencies, sort of get back to that, it's the stat I heard most last year. I think he shot around 42% in high school at like Sunrise Christian or something like that from three. If he can get back to that level of consistency, what he's sort of shown over the last 20 games or so, plus with the volume, you're looking at a player that starts to tick a lot of boxes. And I kind of think about it as, are we starting to get to a player that you couldn't build on 2K? Like they wouldn't let you have enough of these credits where, oh, he's going to be a good driver. He can protect the rim. He can shoot the three. He can finish at the rim. It starts to add up to where we're looking at a fairly sort of complete archetype, even if those soft skills aren't quite getting there. Chuck, my first guy I'm going to talk to you about, I don't know if we could have ever called him a below average passer, but definitely like below average in the amount of passes that he made when he had the ball. I'm quite high on Cam Thomas, and I want to make the case to you that in the next year or so, there is a chance that we see Cam sort of emerge as one of these. Oh, could he actually be a legitimate primary, guys? How is that? Because I think last time we podcasted together, I had a take that felt like a punch in the gut to you. So I just want to mark it on that scale before we get into it.
About him being, I mean, your punch was about LaMelo, as I recall.
Yeah, yeah, it was.
But you're saying, so it's about him being a legit primary offensive option, like a number one offensive option.
I think there's a chance, and I'm looking at it. Go on.
Yeah, I'm not folding like I did when you debuted your LaMelo take. The biggest issue for me, and I'm going to kick it right back to you because I don't want to hog your time, is that if the Nets are very likely to draft a player that they are going to claim a lot of offensive usage immediately. I mean, Cam was a pick in the late 20s in the draft, and though he certainly had the counting stats and he has a lot of talent, I still think there's always been some sort of weird vibes as to whether or not the Nets are really cozying up to him and vice versa. And so that would be my question is he going to, first of all, is he going to play well if they play well alongside Dylan Harper, if they draft Dylan Harper or Cooper Flagg or whomever? And number two, who is the team going to want to seize all those touches? And will they, even if it's not necessarily Machiavellian, but will they in one manner or another be preferring this other player and somewhat undermining Cam's path? Or maybe you see him as going to a different team. But that's sort of the immediate question that pops to mind with Cam.
So we'll iron that out in a moment. Before I came on the pod, I messaged Lucas Kaplan, who for my money does some of the best Brooklyn Nets analysis out there.
Love him. Yeah,
I sort of wanted to check this before. Yeah, great guy, puts really, really great stuff out there, has a lot of time for people as well, which is fantastic. And he messaged me. I've said this for a long time. If Cam Thomas wanted to be Norm Powell, he would be a very, very good NBA player. And I think coming back to that sort of Dylan Harper, Cooper Flagg idea, Lucas at least seemed to suggest that even if Cam isn't getting this primary level use that maybe I'm picturing, and I'll make the case for that in a moment, he has the supplementary sort of shooting skills. He has the off the bounce ability to sort of attack to where he could be a very potent offensive weapon and an efficient one at that, one that contributes to winning basketball if he were playing next to a higher usage guy. But I wanted to make the case for a bigger role where perhaps, say the Nets fall to 4, 5, 6. I think they're already at 6th in the draft lottery odds on Tankathon already. So there's a chance that they don't get that primary guy yet. Maybe they go out and they get a VJ Edgecombe. Maybe they get someone else that's not quite ready for those primary touches. And I compared Cam Thomas's stats this year. Bear in mind, he has not played a ton of games. I think he's sort of in the mid-30s, and his season ended a couple of weeks ago due to a hamstring injury. But I compared his stats in 2025 to Jalen Brunson's stats in 2022, that final Dallas Mavericks season. And I just started to see some sort of similarities. And in trying to do this episode, half of my picks are very like NBA calculator crew based, and then half of them are pure vibes or this guy's got it, this guy doesn't. So this is almost my first analytics pick, which is quite funny when we're talking about a guy like Cam Thomas. But I looked at the number of drives per game, 14.8 per game this year, which is in the upper echelon of the NBA. Turnover percentage of around 6.2%. And that is not quite elite, but getting there. It's sandwiched in between the amount of turnovers that Luka had in that 2022 season and Jalen had in that 2022 season, where I think there is a premium on these players that can handle the ball, that can manufacture shots for themselves or for others while keeping the ball secure, as we see teams like the OKC Thunder and the Houston Rockets really, really put emphasis on winning the turnover battle. So that's the first part where I saw the drives, I saw the turnover percentage, and I thought, well, he can be relatively ball secure. And you can tell me that's because he doesn't pass the ball. But he also gets to the line at a shockingly good rate. So he gets to the line 3.1 times per game on his 14.8 drives, which is triple the amount that Jalen Brunson got to the line in 2022. I think he's a fairly tough shot maker. If you look across the board on his sort of basketball reference stats for shooting, you see that aside from the rim, he is efficient or above average efficiency from pretty much every other spot on the court where, he's a talented player from the mid-range. He's got that floater. He is more than happy to pretend he's 6'8" and sort of get those shots up from long too. And he's also really developed that pull-up three-point shot where I think he's got, the 8th most for pull-up points per game scored this season, and he's 36% on his pull-up threes, which is an above average mark. So I'm just looking at the stats, I'm trying to moneyball it, and I'm not saying that the eye test is telling me that Cam Thomas is the next Jalen Brunson. I'm just saying there's enough there on the page, and there's enough there when you go and watch the tape to show me that he's as good a shot maker as a lot of players in the league, to the point where I think he can handle that usage. And the assists have just started to creep up as well, to the point where he's assisted 9 points per game this year. Brunson assisted 12 in 2022. 1.8 rim assists per game as well. And I think he's playing for a talented coach in Jordi Fernandez, where he's going to be in a scheme that perhaps manufactures looks for him. If it's not a Dylan Harper, if it's not a Cooper Flagg that gets drafted there, could we see one more season where Cam gets the reins? They might view it as a little bit of a tank commander situation, a la Jordan Poole in the Washington Wizards for the Washington Wizards for the past 2 years. But maybe he's too good, and maybe we could see this guy that's potentially about to make that leap, because he's got the skills. It's just, are they 90th percentile or are they 95th, 96th percentile, which is what you need to sort of be that primary guy in the NBA?
No, it's a great point, and it's sort of adjacent to one of the things I said about Montes, because Cam's always been knocked for his relative lack of playmaking.
Yep.
You just sort of ball hog in 90s parlance when I was growing up. But it's the same idea, is that if you get enough reps and you are a good enough driver and scorer, the court will open up to you. And I think even this year, Cam's been injured on and off this year. He was averaging, I think, almost a 2-to-1 assist to turnover ratio, which was not his deal when he was a freshman at LSU at all.
Mm-hmm.
So and if you want to identify, this isn't necessarily about, not maybe sort of 1.5. Yeah, 1.5 to 1. But if you want to try to identify potential most improved player candidates from one year to the next, that would certainly, he would check some boxes, since the player who usually wins that award, usually, this year might be an exception, is someone who makes the All-Star game for the first time. And he's already averaging, he's going to average in the mid-20s next year. He was at 24 this year, and he was 22 and a half the year before. And he's only getting better. So he will have the counting stats to make an all-star case. And what would really be left is whether or not the Nets are sufficiently good around him to compete for a top 6 seed or a play-in spot. The sort of thing that will attract sort of all-star voters in January of next year. And that's, I think that is, those contextual factors are really important in trying to figure out where Cam's stock is going to be next year. And who they draft really matters. If they draft Ace Bailey, then I don't think Cam's stock is going to be much higher than it is now, because Ace is going to bring that team. They're going to have to take a step back with Ace next year, giving him a lot of minutes, and they're going to lose a lot of games. But if they draft someone who sort of fits alongside Cam to enhance his talent, and they, make some canny move in free agency or on the trade market, I think the Nets are one of the only teams with cap space. Then as the tide that lifts the whole team goes, then Cam's notoriety is going to go with it. So I think it's certainly possible, and a decent bet to make, that he's going to be on that list.
So again, I messaged Lucas and I said, I think one of the issues you could maybe point to with this case is that Cam doesn't finish efficiently around the rim. And if you don't do that, that really caps your ceiling as sort of that primary driver of offense, because you're not too concerned about this guy getting in there amongst the trees. I wondered if they say they fall to like 6, 7, and they drafted Derek Queen, for example, someone that can take on some of the playmaking load as well at that big position, someone that maybe has some gravity that can sort of clear the paint for a player like Thomas. Do we see a two-man game develop, or is Cam so sort of one-on-one based that is that not something that maybe comes to fruition? But even thinking about it, you bring up the possibility of trade, like Dallas, for example. Kyrie Irving is going to be injured for 4-5 months, and they have fairly limited assets. If they wanted to get a primary ball handler in the building, someone that could potentially like get those shots up, then slip into that 6-man role, maybe even just like bolster his way through. Maybe Kyrie gives the Brooklyn seal of approval and says, "Yeah, this guy's a certified hooper. Get him in the building." That's something that could really make sense. So I think there are cases where it could work.
That one almost folded me. I had to engage my core from not folding over about the Mavericks. The Mavericks' last 12 months, culminating partially in Cam Thomas. I'm not even upset at it. I think that is sort of like a nice creative thing to think about. Like, it's not that he's necessarily a bad fit on that team. It is just, wow, for it to go from one place to the other would be whiplash inducing. But yeah.
Yeah, the Nico press conference would be very fun, wouldn't it? We've got our two creators back. We're ready, and now we've got Anthony Davis. We're going to be absolutely unstoppable. But yeah, Cam is like my calculator guy, and then my more vibes guy. And there are some stats to sort of back this up. My second player that I want to talk about is Shaden Sharp, and I've been very very tempted to write a article titled "Shaden Sharp Superstar," in sort of a Sean Connery based. It what pops into my head way too much. Mercy. That it would be a thumbnail to just absolutely kill on Blue Sky or X or wherever you're going to post it. But I'm getting the vibes from Shaden, and you know of my love of Zach LaVine. I'm wondering if this is potentially like this generation's Zach. And I think that the offensive sort of ecosystems that exist in the NBA today are far more suited to a player like Shaden, a player like Zach LaVine, than they were 5-10 years ago, to the point where Sharp can function on ball, can function off ball as well. He can shoot off the catch, he can shoot off the dribble, he can manufacture his own looks. I really like him. I really like what we've seen in terms of some of his creativity on the ball this year, his playmaking for others as well. He's someone that I've got a real fondness for, and someone that I really hope does well to sort of like continue to bolster the vibes in this Portland rebuild.
Yeah, so I really like Portland. I am hoping to do a deeper episode on Portland very soon. But I have not always been the biggest fan of Shaden specifically on that team since he was drafted, only because I felt like, if for those who don't remember his background, he was one of the top high school recruits in the country, and he reclassified to come out early, essentially, went to Kentucky, and then didn't play. Not because he was injured, but because he joined the team after the season started, after reclassifying. And through some combination of whatever John Calipari was up to and whatever Shaden's team wanted for him and what his perceived draft stock already was, he just didn't play. And so he was like something of a mystery with no college tape to lean on going into that draft. And Portland has Mike Schmitz in the building, and Mike, knows everything about the draft. And so he was I think he probably stumped for Shaden a good deal when they took him. Went one pick ahead of Dyson Daniels, by the way, as a nice little sliding doors moment. But that all gave me pause, because Shaden, even when he was a big high school recruit, was not a very consistent or practiced passer against something. This is the third guy in a row that we're saying this about, with Matas and Cam and him. And because they drafted Scoot the next year, and at the time they still had Damian Lillard when they drafted him, and now they still technically have Anthony Simons, though I think Anthony's probably going to change teams this summer. Um, I thought they were pigeonholing him into a play finisher kind of role because he
Yeah.
didn't have the natural playmaking chops. He's such a nuclear athlete that you could draw up like lob plays for him. You know, he
Mm.
can certainly finish alley oops and the like. Um, and since he liked to like pull up and shoot threes, and that was sort of his style of play, I thought they might lean into that. And very quickly, you were going to turn this guy into a more narrow player than maybe his talent might turn him into if he were in a different context. You know,
Yeah.
if he were given the ball and said, you know, you're going to be our point guard for the next 10 games. Let's see what you can do. So, and the big concern with doing that is that I think the NBA, sort of like with Levine, I think the NBA is starting to squeeze those sort of lighter playmaking shooting guards out of prominent roles. I think
Hmm.
you see a lot of what I call switchblade guards at the two, guys who have some playmaking but who have a ton of defensive versatility, like Derek White, Herb Jones, Jalen Suggs, Cason Wallace, you know, those kind of players. You see a lot of that because their skill set is very complementary to high usage offensive stars. But with
Mm.
Shaden, whose chief like tilt is offensive, his like chief primary skills are on the offensive end of the floor. He's got to be really, really, really good at those to get his usage all the way up. And even as Portland's gotten better this year, you've seen them move him to the bench when they are fully healthy because
Hmm.
they start Avdia and Tumani Kamara, who's, you know, excellent as their wings. They have Klingon and Aiton as centers, and Klingon is sort of the future there. And they've got Scoot at guard. And so I think next year, if you see Scoot, Shaden, Denny, Tumani, and Klingon as their starters, Shaden will have an opportunity to pop a little bit. But, you know, over 3 years, you know, his 3-point shooting was 36% as a rookie on sort of a lost team and a lost season. Last year, he was injured, but on 5.5 threes a game, it was 33%. This year,
Mm.
on 6.5 threes per game, it's 31%. And for like a shot maker first player, like that is just not encouraging enough for me at the moment. And Avdia has taken on like so many guard reps with them this year because he's like this Josh Hart player in transition. Like he's so good at forcing stuff to the rim that I
Yeah.
feel like Shaden might, I get not really even blaming him, but he might sort of retreat back into that off ball role. And I just think it's really hard to see major leaps in that off ball role unless you're absolutely scorching the nets and setting them on fire. And so that it's not that I think it's impossible. It's just
Mm.
that I think the path is deceptively narrow for him. But when he looks good, when he's on, he's like incredible to watch. I totally get that. I just, you know, teams can get tantalized with these sorts of players. You know, Jalen Green is another kind of example in Houston. And Houston's, you know, they're not complaining about Jalen Green right now. Some people might be. But he is
Yeah.
certainly not the fulcrum of their offense like they maybe hoped that he would be. And there's a big argument that they're kind of better when he's off the floor. And so it's a good problem to have if your team's that good. I think Portland hopes to get that good, but it still leaves Shaden potentially in a little bit of no man's land.
So I think what I'd say is I've loved your stuff on Switchblade guards for the last like 12, 18 months. I think they're some of the more fun players to sort of watch in the league, and they're some of the more fun players to sort of scout for. But I sort of read the NBA's development and maybe that like two guard, three, that guard position going in a slightly different way to the point where I think we're really getting to that stage where nearly all five of your guys are going to have some form of like on ball talent, some form
Mm-hmm.
of like, I can score for myself. I have that gravity, whether that be on or off the ball. And I look at the way that the sort of playmaking load has been redistributed away from such heliocentric guards, more towards like that sort of handoff game, the elbow game. I look at Donovan Klingon in Portland as well. And I wonder if your sort of hooper types, your Shaden Sharps, your previously like Jamal Crawfords, for example, or Zach Levine. We'll keep going back to the well. Will their playmaking deficiencies be slightly covered up by the fact that that playmaking load has been redistributed to the front court? And can a player that can sort of generate his own shots on the ball? Shaden, 41% of his 2-point attempts have been assisted this year, which means 59% haven't. He's generated them on his own. And he's shot 58% from 2-point range over his last 30 games and 57.5% for the entire year as well. So, like, while the 3-point shot hasn't been there, and while it looks as though the 3-point shot, at least percentage wise, has really, really regressed since his sort of rookie year, where he was playing more of that fifth starter role, I'm just willing to bank on he's already efficient from 2-point range. He generates his scoring looks when it's for him on ball, not in that traditional American way of like, I'm faster, stronger, taller than you. I think he has like a really lovely sort of use of cadence, and he can really slow himself down and like take his time on ball. I think that if the shooting were to come around, if he were to get up to sort of like 33% on his pull-ups and then 36, 37% on his catch and shoots, you're suddenly looking at a guy that is plus true shooting. You're looking at an athlete that can potentially develop into a little bit more of a defensive player in that defensive ecosystem in Portland as well. And someone that I think his life will be made easier by the fact that the way offenses run has changed so significantly in the last few years, away from like, I think 6-7 years ago, Shaden would have had to have run 35, 40 pick and rolls to be a proper player in the league. Now, I don't think he has to do that. I think he can be this blend of off ball that you're talking about and on ball that I'm talking about, to the point where maybe you just have 5 really good basketball players on the court that can all do a little bit in Portland, including Tumani, who seems to have developed that like scoring game a little bit while also being that defensive monster. So that would be my Shaden rebuttal, so I can do my superstar video in due time.
Well, and to your point, I mean, I brought up Jalen Green. Jalen Green has
Yeah.
never sniffed 56% from 2. And he and Shaden take a similar number of shots from that area. And Jalen like is around maybe 48, 49% for his career. His best percentage from 2 actually was when he was a rookie, when his volume was a bit lighter, and he was right at 50%. So Shaden is already a more efficient player inside the arc than Jalen Green ever has been. So that does certainly portend well. It's, so like I said, I'm not going to, I know it seems like I was making the case against it. I do have concerns with it, but really athletic, talented guys who can get to the rim, they can surprise you. They can certainly make their leaps. So I certainly hope that for Shaden, because I really like what Portland is building out there. What they're really missing is sort of that go-to efficient shot maker. I mean, lots of teams would like to have a go-to efficient shot maker, but in Portland especially, like, Denny's not really that guy. And I don't know that Scoot necessarily projects to be that guy. So Portland really wants Sharp to be that guy, like down the stretch of games, a real closer. But we'll just have to see if it coalesces next year.
And the other bits touch on what you were talking about in terms of like how he got to the league. I just wonder if maybe like he's 6 to 9 months behind of what his development curve would have been, because he missed that year playing basketball, because he's had some time out at age 21 still. This is his age 21 season, will be age 22 next year. Is there slightly more left in the developmental tank than there would be for a similar prospect sort of going into their 3rd, 4th year? That's the only other thing that I'm thinking about when I've sort of looked at his game and how it's developed over the last couple of years. Is there a little bit more juice to be found? But we'll see on Shaden. I pride myself on being like this really sort of analytical podcast where we get in and amongst the data and we're sort of looking for these hidden gems. And Chuck, I've spoken to you in the last couple of months about LaMelo Ball, Cam Thomas, Shaden Sharp, Zach Levine. It is proper. This stuff would go down well on TikTok. I think I need to get the TikTok page going again.
Yeah, that's right. Drop, don't stop, baby. Yeah, that's you.
Oh, I like that. Yeah, I like that a lot. Let's see if I get away with the trademark there. Who have you got as your next guy?
Let's see. I'll try to do 2 at once here.
Mhm.
and we'll go with Aaron Wiggins of the Oklahoma City Thunder and Jabari Smith of the Houston Rockets, since they are the Thunder and Rockets are the top 2 seeds in the West.
Nice.
I'll start with Aaron. Uh, Aaron is sort of an intermittent starter for the Thunder, but is mostly a bench player, and I think will come off the bench in the playoffs. They obviously start SGA, Jalen Williams, Chet, and then Dort starts the vast majority of the time. And it's that fifth starter spot that toggles a little bit. I think right now they're starting Wallace in that spot. And they, traded Giddey for Caruso. So Caruso gets healthy minutes off the bench for them. And so Aaron is not forgotten in OKC. OKC knows how important Aaron is. But I think among sort of national discourse, Wiggins is a bit of a still like under the radar guy. And he was a second round pick. And they've already resigned him to a far below market Presti special kind of contract. So he's still sort of floating under a lot of radars. And I think that it is very likely that the Thunder are going to make the finals. I think it is pretty likely that the Thunder are going to win the title. And so I think that a lot of people are going to become more familiar with Aaron Wiggins because he's going to play in the playoffs. He is a real deal player for them. And, Dort, Wallace, Caruso, those are all switchblade guys. OKC has loaded up very heavily on the switchblade archetype. Before I even called it a switchblade archetype or knew what it was. I mean, they've been ahead of the curve as they usually are. Wiggins can defend, certainly. I mean, he's 6'6" and long, and he's spent years developing in that OKC system, which is a very good system. But what he has that those other players don't have to as large an extent is just excellent touch, excellent shooting and scoring touch. And the kind of shooting and scoring touch, I think, that justifies a larger role for him. Now, they're so stacked that larger role may not fully manifest in the next 12 months, but I wouldn't be surprised if he were a fifth starter next year, if he kind of sees that role. And to my point, this is his fourth season in the league. His first year, his rookie year was whatever. He's a second round pick and not really seeing the floor that much. But in his last 3 years, he's shot 39% from three. He shot 49% from three last year on only an attempt and a half a game. But his usage jacked up this year to 4.5 attempts from three at 38%. He's been around 80% free throw every year, and he's been consistently 58 to 59% inside the arc. Now, OKC runs a very sort of utopian 5-out system. So I'm not saying that Aaron necessarily would have replicated these numbers in a different organization, but you can only shoot the shots that are in front of you and play with the teammates you play with. And it has done him very good to be in Oklahoma City playing in that system under those coaches and with those teammates. So when you're that efficient, this is similar but not the same to what I've been screaming about regarding Trey Murphy for his whole career in New Orleans. If you are this efficient, it is now the team's responsibility to just give you more shots until your efficiency comes down. You have to just give the ball to people who are really good at scoring until defenses find out a way to slow them down and stop them. I mean, he's only averaging 12 points, 4 rebounds, and just under 2 assists this year. But if you look at the games where Shea sits out, he tends to pop every single time. I'll pull up those specific games in a moment because I don't have them in front of me. But I think SGA will and should win MVP this year. Separate conversation. But I think whenever MVP stuff comes up, you talk about, how does the team perform when this MVP candidate is off the floor? And I think Shea this year is getting a bump, rightfully so, because OKC's offense really, really takes a hit with him off the floor. They really struggle for offensive creation and consistency when he's off. But Wiggins, interestingly enough, first of all, when he and Shea share the floor, let's start there. We'll go Shea on, Wiggins off, since that's like starter minutes, right? Because Wiggins comes off the bench. With Shea on, Wiggins off, they're outscoring teams by 15 points per 100 possessions. Yowza. When they share the floor, it gets better, and they outscore teams by 17 per 100. When Wiggins is on and Shea sits, they still outscore teams by 8 points per 100 possessions. And that's an 800-minute sample, and their offensive rating is still a 117. And that all sort of it's all sort of fits perfectly with how efficient Wiggins is. I mentioned before the games where Shea has sat. We have let's see. He scored 35 in their last game. I know this is against the Jazz at the end of the year, but 35, 7, 2, and 2. They played the Quentin Grimes Sixers last month. He had 26, 4, and 6 against them. They played Portland at the beginning of March. He had 35, 3, 1, and 1. That was just before the Denver back-to-back, and so Shea rested for that since this big showcase couplet of games. Had 24 against Brooklyn in February. And he had 41 and 14 rebounds against the Kings at the beginning of February. So this is sort of, I don't want to say he's like a monstrous NBA offensive player, because that label is really reserved for the best of the best. But there is talent here begging for a bigger role. And since Chet and Jalen are going to become extension eligible, since they were drafted in the same year this summer, they will probably both ink their extensions, and they won't kick in yet. So like OKC won't feel that pain with the various aprons just yet. But being under the contract Wiggins is under, if they choose to try to move someone at some point, I think Dort would probably be a candidate, unfortunately. I know Dort's kind of like a folk hero out there. I think you could insert Wiggins into that slot, and the team could possibly get better. So that's a big that is like my case for Aaron Wiggins.
I've become very, very addicted to Data Baller in the last sort of month and a half or so since it's come out. Really, really great like NBA data website. And Chuck, ironically, I got some with or without you numbers up while just before you went into your stuff with Shea on the floor and Wiggins on the floor, etc. And I looked at Wiggins on versus Dort on, and with just Wiggins playing, no Dort, the Thunder have a 126.4 offensive rating in 841 minutes this year, with a 105 defensive rating as well. So just a nice 21.2 plus net rating there. With Shea and Wiggins, no Dort, the Thunder have a plus 30 net rating because that offensive rating jumps up to 133.8. So I think you might be right. I love either talking about like these primary guys or these like force multipliers where they're on the floor and they're almost like that video game where you cross something and it's like, oh, ×2, ×3 here, and your points that you can get just sort of like skyrocket infinitely. And I think that Wiggins is really, really fun hit there. I've podcasted with Dan Favali of Hardwood Knocks a few times, and he's a massive like Aaron Wiggins fan as well. And they just have this habit of producing these sort of like perfect basketball players where they can catch and shoot. They know when to cut. And it jumps out to me as well, those games where Shea misses and it's like, oh, I wonder how the Thunder did that night. And it's like, oh, Aaron Wiggins took 14 threes and scored 35 points. Great. Even when Shea's out, they still win by 20. They still win by 25. So I think that's a really, really great pick. And I think hitting on that contract situation as well, where it's just about to get sort of a little bit sticky in OKC, they would be insane to look at moving an Aaron Wiggins because he seems to be that perfect blend of team-friendly contract and also really, really bolstering that offense. And I know that this team has a great offense anyway, but to have someone that can come in and sort of get it up to those sort of like Boston levels, get it up to those really, really freaky 2K numbers, that they would be crazy to move off of an Aaron Wiggins. So I hope you're right, and I hope that he becomes an NBA champion come this postseason. Do you want to make the case for Jabari as well?
Certainly. And this will be a shorter case. Jabari was my number one player in the 2022 draft, ahead of Chet. Chet was my number two, ahead of Jaden Ivey, who was my number three, and Paolo was my number four. Paolo was my number four. I was a comparative, Paolo hater. And I like Paolo a lot, but my concerns about him and his shot selection and his offensive efficiency and his projection, I would say have not been put to rest. I will put it that way. Not that I was necessarily correct on all of those evals, but Jabari is not starting in Houston because Amen Thompson took his spot, rightfully so, with how good Amen is. And so in terms of where his stock is now, for someone taken so high in the draft, taken number 3, Jabari's stock has certainly dipped because people see him as like sort of not a starter quality player on a good team. And he got banged up a little bit this year. But Jabari, let's see, he turned 20. He's just freshly 22, or he is turning 22 this playoff season. I think his birthday's in May. So he is still quite young. And in this bench role, he has thrived. And again, just going to these on-offs, when he actually plays alongside Amen and Şengün, which is a nearly 500-minute sample, which is not nothing. I mean, 500 is pretty healthy, this time of the year. Houston outscores their opponents by 13 points per 100. When Jabari and Şengün are on and Amen is off, that dips, but they still outscore teams by 4 points per 100. And that's because Jabari has proven himself to be a very good rebounder and a very useful defensive player. And if you can do that in the front court, there's going to be a place for you. And what Jabari has not quite yet gotten the chance to do is demonstrate his value as a shot maker. And because coming out of the draft, that's why he got taken that high. And that's a big reason why I ranked him number 1 in that class, was because he hit over 40% of his threes at 6'11", on 10 threes per 100 attempted at Auburn. Like, this guy has serious shooting talent, and it just, for one reason or another, whether it was starting your career out under Steven Silas or now having this team be really, really good with Ime, he hasn't had the chance to lean into it. And I think he and Şengün, probably both within Rockets culture and outside of it, have been pitted against each other as like, well, either Jabari's your center or Şengün's your center. But they've shown that they can play together. And they have Steven Adams, I believe, there now, and he's doing really well in his minutes with Şengün, with their sort of like zone gimmick that they do when he's on the floor. And so again, Jabari is sort of being forgotten. But if you've had all these sort of developmental bumps in the road and players to compete with and messy fits over your first 3 years, and your team is still very, very good with you on the court, and you can still really play with the best players on your team, and you're still only 21, and you have positional size and this talent, like, there's nowhere to go but up. And with the playoffs coming up, it will be very fashionable to pick against the Rockets in the first round because they lack, quote unquote, an alpha. That doesn't really mean anything. That's why people like to use the word, because there's no definition. It means whatever they want it to mean. But I think, like, let's say they play the Warriors, who have those two alphas in Jimmy Butler and in Steph Curry, especially Butler, who's from Houston and was available via trade, and they didn't trade for him and blah, blah, blah. That'll be the whole deal. I don't think it's impossible for the Warriors to beat that team. I think they are capable of it. I think the Warriors are very good. But I'm just telling you, I'm going to pick the Rockets against whoever they play in the first round. I don't know about second round. We'll see. But they'll still have home court then too, because the Rockets have a degree of athletic talent that is just going to wear you out. in the playoffs. And if they, assuming they get through that first round, when now you have to play every other day starting in round 2, that athletic edge is going to become even more pronounced. So as I expect them to make a run, and since they already rely on Jabari, the case is very similar to him and Wiggins. They just got taken at opposite points in the draft. I think that his profile will rise as it should. And I can start, victory lapping my take that doesn't look too good right now in 2022. But that's not the point. The point is Jabari's good, and he's going to be good in the playoffs, and he's going to be even better next year when his offense finally gets some consistent time to shine.
It's the point a little bit though, right? just a little bit, a little bit. But no, I messaged you before this. I was quite close to picking Jabari as well because he's a player that I've been fascinated with for the last 18 months or so. I had these ideas of like this Lowry Markkanen style trajectory before this year, where I think you look at Jabari and you look at his frame. He's obviously come into the NBA and he's played big minutes, and he's played big minutes young. He just looked like the kind of guy to me that once he got sort of some meat on the bone, once he started to really sort of strengthen and could use that sort of bully ball frame up against proper NBA like professional players, you might start to see that shot making sort of reemerge, because he's not your dribble hezzy pull up from 35 feet guy. He is your run him off of screens, get him in the post, get him like against mismatches kind of offensive weapon that we're going to be looking for. And it just looked like Houston wasn't necessarily going to be that place for me. So I've always thought, oh, maybe it's going to be a trade for Jabari. Right. But since he's sort of come back in post this injury, the rebounding numbers, like you said, have just been absolutely sky high. And when you were speaking about Matas and just sort of this give me all the smoke mentality, I'm going to try to do absolutely everything that I can when I'm on the NBA court. I think Jabari has sort of gone the opposite way, where it's, yes, I was the third pick in the draft. Yes, I thought I was going to go first before 10 minutes before draft time. But he's very much shown a willingness to sort of sacrifice his role, sacrifice his shots, his touches, and just do whatever it takes to win. And I think this sort of emergence as that plus rebounder. He is a plus defender at his size. He can switch out onto the perimeter. He's going to offer them a lot of flexibility, like pretty much every Houston Rocket wing / forward does. Right. I think that's a really, really fun pick. And if that shooting number, if that 3-point percentage can just start to creep up, and again, I'll just note the 2-point percentage over the last 15 games is at nearly 57%. And that is not on a particularly well-spaced floor in Houston. They obviously really, really emphasize on that offensive rebounding edge. If we start to see sort of plus efficiency scoring, then this is suddenly one of the better sort of like really, really high-end role players in the league. And you're 22 years old, and there's still room for that scoring game to develop, right?
Yes, sir. I've got nothing to add. You're singing on key and on pitch, and it's beautiful. So thank you, Jack.
Excellent. Then I will move you on to the team that I think might beat the Houston Rockets in the first round if things don't go their way tonight in terms of their playoff seeding. And I'll move you on to my biggest, most audacious, bombastic pick, the one that you messaged me and you said, well, I can't wait to hear the case, Jack. Yeah. And I'm moving us on to Ant Edwards. And maybe I'm over-indexing a little bit on sort of like the ESPN or the NBA on TNT coverage. But it feels to me like Ant has taken a gigantic step forward in his game again this year, where last year to me, it felt like the driving felt 10 times more complicated, and sort of the dribble moves looked fantastic. And it was almost sort of like Kyrie Irving-esque, right? The amount that he could sort of bend and flex his body. And that really, really like contrasted to that first year, where it felt like a lot of the highlights were him jumping really high and moving really fast in straight lines. This year, he has become like, I don't know how to rank him as a shooter, but he is now an elite NBA 3-point shooter. There is no contesting that. He's played nearly 82 games this year. And I think he's hit the second most threes behind a guy called Steph Curry. Just insane development from one of the most athletic players in the league to start scoring. I think he's taken about 7.5 pull-up 3-point attempts per game. And in the first half of the season, he was hitting them around a sort of 40% threshold. And then if you look at Ant in the last sort of 25 games since Julius Randle has come back into the fold, since he's returned from injury, the 2-point percentage, which was slightly concerning. Again, if we're going to talk about a guy of this athletic talent, his 2-point percentage in the first, let's have a look here, 43 games of the season was around 45.7%, which is really, really concerning for someone that consistently is going to vie for Dunk of the Year. Since Julius Randle has come back over his last 25 games, you're getting up towards that 60% mark from 2. And I just wonder if these two things marry, if this 2-point prowess returns and efficiency returns, where the driving lanes are perhaps a little bit more clear. Plus, you have this just nuclear shooting. We've seen Ant raise his game in the playoffs for the last 2 seasons now, where he just looks like a completely different player. I wonder if he could turn sort of the narrative on this Minnesota season completely around from, oh my God, they made this massive mistake trading Karl Anthony Towns, to, no, you have one of the top 5 playoff performers in the entire league. He is offensively unstoppable. He's the guy that, if I were to pick someone to go against Houston, I might pick Ant because he can compete on that athletic level as well. And, even if you're closing off the paint, he's just going to get 15 threes up a game. So I wonder if we're just about to come to this sort of generational playoff run, and I could look really, really stupid if they embarrass themselves in the play-in. And then zooming out a little bit further on now, I wonder if Rudy's time as a 35-minute a game starter is sort of coming to an end a little bit. And I wonder if they re-sign Naz Reid next year, regardless of what happens in these playoffs. You're seeing Ant Edwards compete in a much more offensively favourable environment, where it might be Naz at the 5, Jaden McDaniels at the 4, or Julius Randle at the 4, Jaden McDaniels at the 3. And suddenly this guy who, like, to me, his profile this year is reminding me a little bit of, like, I wonder if he can get up to sort of a Harden-y level where the playmaking isn't necessarily there, but I think that the scoring and sort of the unstoppableness might be there. He's competing in an environment that's more well-spaced, where we could see that marriage of 2-point efficiency because he's got spaced out driving lanes, and then just, 8 pull-up three attempts per game on 38-40%. And we're just looking at one of the 3 or 4 more unstoppable players in the league. So it's a take delivered with gusto. It's a little bit like Charles Barkley looks at this 3-point shooting development and says, well, he should get his ass back down in the paint. I'm sick of that. I want everyone to realize
you should have committed harder to the impression, to the voice. You were close, and then you backed off.
Not as an Englishman. I'm not about to talk about women in San Antonio or anything like that. But I like, something is going to click where everyone is going to realize it's really, really good that the most athletic player in the league, or one of the 5 most athletic players in the league, is also emerging as one of the 10 best shooters. It's not bad that he likes taking all these threes. So that's my Edwards spiel. That's where I think he could really, like, even up his aura and his stock to another level, given a really good playoff run and a better environment next year.
Yeah, I don't disagree with much of what you said. It's just his stock seems already so high to me. I mean, he's getting nitpicked the way that stars get nitpicked. And I don't so until he, I think, makes the finals, he'll continue to get nitpicked. It's just, Julius Randle, I think, is seen as an anchor until he proves otherwise in the playoffs. Mm-hmm. But he came back. It's been 20 games since he's come back, and they are 16-4 in those games. And they won the 5 games leading up to him going out. So they are 21-4 in their last 25 with Julius Randle in the starting lineup. And you mentioned quite insultingly working miracles with regards to Patrick Williams and setting the table for him. I would think that Ant should receive, by the same scale, some credit for making their team on the fly amid this injury to Randle a Western Conference contender that has fully assimilated Randle with uncertain contract situations. Randle is in a contract year. Reed's in a contract year. And who knows what they end up doing with Gobert and all that stuff. There's lots of other factors at play, and that team has really come together. And them against Houston be a great matchup. I won't necessarily get into that, but I think your point about the 3-point volume is right. It's just, I think for him to jump a level, it would mean that he'd be getting MVP votes next year, or they make the finals this year. That's the only way where I can imagine his stock somehow really being higher than it is now. And he's got to certainly avoid an early playoff exit, or else that stock will dip and they'll have to bring it back up. But in terms of your theory, I like your theory a lot.
So yeah, maybe the player himself has gotten better. It's just that stock was so high last year that, if anything, his level has actually reached what it should have been given his sort of value coming out of that playoff series last year, even though I think the 3-point shooting leap sort of maybe started in that postseason.
Right.
So we'll see. But yeah, they're going to be an awful lot of fun in the playoffs this year. And Houston versus Minnesota, someone's going to end up dead. Isaiah Stewart's going to break into the arena. It feels like
These games have not
environment.
The games have not concluded today, and so those seedings, as of the recording, are unknown. But when people listen to this, I'm sure they'll be decided. I know that the Wolves have favorable tiebreakers a lot among that group of teams. So I think as long as they beat the Jazz, they will likely finish in the top 6 and avoid Houston in round 1. Unfortunately, we'll have to settle for them against Denver again or something, which Minnesota would be licking their chops for, which would be a lot of fun. So,
can I ask you an awful question to ask anyone on an NBA podcast? If you were Tim Connolly a couple of months ago and Nico Harrison had called and said, "Hey, I'm looking to move Luka Doncic in a straight swap for Anthony Edwards," do you think? So I think when that came about, I just thought, no, that's insane. I wouldn't swap Luka for Ant. I would want to keep Luka. Is there a scenario where Ant gets to that stage where people would go, yeah, maybe I would swap Ant for Luka?
So are you asking what I would have done, or do you like
what would you do now? You get that phone call today. Who would you take for the next 5 years going forward?
I mean, you gotta look at how much like revenue the Mavs are losing by trading Luka. I mean, they got and Anthony Davis is not the same level of like charisma and marketability as Ant Edwards, to say nothing of Ant's a decade younger. But if you were to tell me that all other factors are equal and we're looking just from like basketball purposes, just from basketball purposes, it's very close. I am leaning Luka, but the real what's keeping me from just saying Luka flat out is durability. Is the durability concern. Now, a lot of Ant's talent, even that 3-point volume, is chained to his athleticism and the threat of his drives and all of that. And so if he loses a little bit of athleticism through injury, then you can see kind of a bigger decline than you would in other really gifted players. Whereas Luka, though I am concerned about his sort of durability and habits, he can sort of play hurt and still do what he does because so much of his advantage comes from how he processes the game and reads it. And he tends to play slow. So I would lean Luka because I still think Luka right now is the overall better player. But the durability concerns might possibly shift it. In reality, it's close and murky enough that the contextual stuff would lead me not to make that trade in either direction. But if you're asking me purely from a basketball point of view, the durability concerns certainly put it within range. Makes it close as to who I would prefer to have.
Well, for the NBA Stock Exchange 2026, I will make sure to ask you that question again in a year's time, and we'll see. That will be our marker for whether Ant was a good pick or not, because there's a chance that we look and we go, absolutely not. Luka is leading the LA Lakers to a 1-2 seed, and their future is sewn up for the next 10 years.
Yeah, they're going to be good. Yeah.
Well, we shall see. We shall see. Who's your next player, Chuck? Because I feel like we need to return to planet Earth a little bit after talking about.
I'll do my last two at the same time, and that is, one's a playoff performer, the other is not. He's a deeper cut, but the playoff performer is Jarris Walker for the Indiana Pacers. The deeper cut is Keyshawn George for the Washington Wizards. I'll do Jarris first since he's about to play in the playoffs. it's a similar case to Wiggins, but I don't think Jarris is the offensive talent that Wiggins is. It's just that he has only become a consistent rotation member on the Pacers recently, like within the last. I guess he's been more consistent this year as a rotation player, and this is year 2 for him. But he, because he was a top 10 pick, there was a certain level of expectation that he would play his rookie year, and he didn't. And I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that they had Obi Toppin in sort of that 4-man role off the bench, and they trade for Pascal Siakam, and that kind of blocks Jarris. Obviously, they have Miles at the 5, and Jarris really isn't a 5. And so he has had to sort of rebuild his body a little bit and remake his game into more of a wing who can sort of like play at the 3, so to speak, and make sure his 3-point volume is really there. And I think he has done that. I think that he has turned that corner, and I think he's been averaging, over 4 attempts from 3 a game over the last few weeks. He's shooting 41% from 3 on 180 total attempts this year. So that's certainly not nothing. The other parts of his game, he was a very high feel player at Houston coming out of the draft. Really good at defensive rotations and being on time. Very good connecting passer. And in Indiana, you have so much passing talent on the floor at any given time between Halliburton, Nembhard, and McConnell that everyone else on that team by default kind of becomes play finisher-ish. Yeah. And though Jarris is, 6'6", 6'7" with a 7'3" wingspan, he isn't the nuclear run and jump athlete, that Toppin or Siakam or Turner are. And so he's been in this little bit of an in-between space. But I think that now that he will be in a playoff rotation, and I like the Pacers a lot too. I think I will pick them to win their first round series again this year. I think they'll probably play Milwaukee, and I'll pick them to beat Milwaukee. I just think you'll see him in a light where he is not afraid to take the threes that other teams will dare him to take. And I think it is very likely to swing that series because I just sort of believe in his playoff skills, which is that the open threes, which is what they're going to ask of him to do a lot. He can attack a closeout and get off the ball because he has that connecting passing vision. And he has enough bulk to compete with Giannis. And I think he is someone they will use against Giannis. Mm-hmm. No one's going to stop Giannis, obviously. But in terms of being in the right place, in the right time, at the right time, Jarris will be. And so I think his stock is going to rise from that. And even though his rotation spot is basically secured now, that will go from basically to absolutely going into next year. And he could very well start next year. It'll be between him and Nesmith. Nesmith is the more switchbladey type who can handle guards at point of attack. But he can be a very valuable sort of connective defensive player as well. And the Pacers are always looking for more of that because their offense is always going to be good and their defense is going to struggle until they put the players around Halliburton that makes it struggle less. And I think even though Jarris, again, he has somewhat heavy feet, he's not a perfect prospect on that end by any means. I think he has enough feel, enough length to help them out meaningfully next year. So he would be my pick. And then for I'll let you respond, and then I'll go to Keyshawn since it's sort of an apples and oranges thing.
Yeah, he had a kind of weird introduction to the NBA because Houston ran like the most aggressive defensive system sort of at the college level where there was a lot of onus on him making a lot of backline rotations and communicating, whereas Caitlin Cooper has covered this, Samson Falk has covered this as well. Up until this year, Rick Carlisle really wanted the Indiana Pacers to guard man for man and to not really send that much help. So it really sort of simplified the scheme and maybe like took away some of that Jarris superpower where a lot of it was in the communication, the reading the play, whereas now it's no, can you just guard your man, please? And yeah, he's really, really done a great job of sort of adapting his game. I remember last year looking just at the G League numbers where he was taking 7.5 threes per game, knocking down like 38% of them. And the 3-point percentage has continued to be good since he's come into the team this year as well. I think that's a really, really fun pick. And I think if you were to even factor in like the Obi Toppin contract situation, and shout out Trill, who highlighted this for Zach Lowe's return podcast. Yes, Zach Lowe said that he really, really liked Obi Toppin. And it's like, oh, it's such a shame that we're going to see him leave Indiana where it really suits. But it will be good for Jarris sort of coming into the team and perhaps like increasing that top end level on the defensive end again. So yeah, Jarris is a great pick. No notes. It's really nice that in Indiana they've gone from 2 seasons ago having Buddy Hield guard Giannis to 1 season ago having Aaron Neesmith, and now we're finally getting to like Giannis guard size with Jarris Walker with that sort of body frame as well. So he's going to be a really exciting watch in the postseason. One guy who is not going to be an exciting watch in the postseason through no fault of his own is Keyshawn George. Do you want to take us away on Keyshawn, please, Chuck?
Yeah, I think another one of the most underrated players in the draft. Buzelis at least was a high-profile prospect and went in the lottery. Keyshawn was not, was playing in Sweden as a youth player, I believe Sweden, and then for a sort of lost Miami team at the college level that kind of imploded. They were a team that went to the Final Four, and then last year they were coming off of that Final Four appearance, and he was their freshman who they didn't really have a clear plan for. They didn't really have a clear plan for anyone. Jim Larinaga quit. It was just one of those sort of like complete mess seasons. And so he averaged fewer than 10 points a game. In the draft, I liked him. Him and Jalen Wells, I had as sort of late first round picks. The Wiz take Keyshawn in the late first round. And I think I talked to you about him when you came on my podcast early in the season. I mentioned that he had started the Flash. And when he's been healthy, the Wiz have started him. Now, he shot about like 40% from the field all around, maybe a little worse. And you can certainly, like, he was gifted minutes. There's no question about that. But if you watch him, one of the reasons he was not a higher pick, apart from his background, was that he didn't test well at the combine. He's a legit 6'8", 6'9", and he can dribble, pass, and shoot. I mean, he shot 40% from 3 at Miami on limited volume, but he got him up. But he didn't test well. And so the idea was like, is this guy really going to be athletic enough to be a starter? That's what kept me from ranking him higher. Sure. But like Buzelis, although he goes about it in a different way, he just has a real gift for hand placement. If you drive into him, and he has real size, he's very good at locating the ball for deflections and steals and blocks. And if you look at his game log, there's lots of multi-deflection games on there. His defensive chops is one of the most pleasant surprises to me about the perception of a prospect's skill pre-draft and what it's like in the NBA. Like, it is a real jump. And if you can defend like that, the offensive skill with him was never a question. So yes, he wasn't efficient. Neither was Alex Sarr. They were not an efficient team. I'm not projecting Keyshawn to become some all-star or anything like that. But 6'8" who can dribble, pass, and shoot and defend is a starting wing. Like, he's a starting wing, and he's going to continue to start at the NBA level. And the Wizards will be a little bit better next year because they only won 18 games this year. And so I think he will get a lot of sort of nerd recognition over the next 12 months as like the Wiz start to circle the wagons. And I think that, again, if I were redrafting the draft, there's a good chance I would take him in the top 5 and certainly in the top 10. So I'd like Jalen Wells has gotten the, underrated wing bump given how good the Grizz were this year. I just think Keyshawn is step for step for him in terms of overall projectable talent. So that is my case on Keyshawn George.
I will take you to another Washington wing / forward that I would redraft in maybe the top 5 for 2023 this time. And my second last player is Bilal Coulibaly. And I feel like I'm buying after the slump here, where maybe 10, 15 games into the season, I had Matt Powers on the podcast and we spoke about guys that we thought had maybe reached that next level. and Bilal was a name that came up on both of our agendas because he had this sort of lightning start to the season where he looked absolutely incredible. It's just sort of started to drop that little bit. I say that little bit. It dropped after those first 15 to 20 games. But Bilal is just one of the more interesting players in the league to watch. Still incredibly young, an incredible athlete that can sort of get up and above a lot of players, that can run really, really fast in a straight line. A great defender as well, both sort of one on one, but also like as this ancillary rim protector as well. Got both 1.8 steal and block rate. And I picked him here because while it has not been pretty this season, he's averaging 8 drives per game as a second year player, and that is third to Keontae George and Scoot Henderson in the 2023 draft class. And I just think a player of that athletic ability, getting that runway through this year and then next year as well, by the time next year rolls around, if he can start to develop that touch outside of sort of the outside of the restricted area, we might be looking at a player that is a real sort of plus wing starter, both on the defensive but also the offensive end, because he's got a crazy hard shot diet. Only 23% of his threes have come from the corners this year, which means he's shooting a lot above the break. And I'm just sort of betting that that shooting development comes on and sort of marries with his incredible athletic tools. And I think his really, really sharp brain as well, because he can make some passing reads. He's been entrusted with the ball. He can do it both on the offensive end and the defensive end. Bilal is a guy that I am super high on. And I said top 5, and I might lean redrafting maybe top 3. I think he might be my third guy off the board in 2023 after Vic and Amin Thompson.
Yeah, I love Bilal. And after that 2023 draft, that summer, I did like a long piece where I ranked as many players from the previous 3 drafts combined, 2021, 2022, and the fresh Wemby draft, 2023, as I could. And I think I ranked Bilal and Brandon Miller like back to back, because that was after Summer League where I saw Bilal and I was already in on him. I think I ranked him ahead of Asar on my board, and Asar is really good too, obviously. But I was very encouraged this season by Bilal's rim finishing early in the year. And like the Wiz, again, you played with Kyle Kuzma most of the year. It was very much a lost year. But since now they have veterans in the door in Smart and Middleton to just sort of be positive presences in contrast to Kyle Kuzma. And they'll get in another rookie. I mean, they are a team begging for offensive competence more than anyone else in the league. And once that happens, it will lift all boats if they get that guy. So hopefully they get it soon. But once they do, and you can really leverage Bilal's play finishing off of someone else's gravity, then I agree with you. I mean, I think Bilal is very legit and really good. And I think probably his stock is not that high right now because it dipped after that hot start. But it is impossible to sustain a start like that, not because he isn't talented, but because the infrastructure was not there. It was built to dip. And so once it's built to rebound, then he'll be on his way. But I agree.
I almost disagree. I don't know if I want them to get that guy that really raises their offensive ceiling, because I think the best thing long term will be to see Bub Carrington, Keyshawn George, Alex Sarr, Bilal Coulibaly get all of these on ball reps. And I know that Jordan Poole is taking all of them at the moment, but maybe it's
so you don't want them to get Cooper Flag, is what you're saying?
I'm sorry, Washington fans. I don't. I want you to get like this great complimentary piece and then really, really load up for 2026, where you get one of AJ, Cam Boozer, or Darren Peterson. I think they're the 3 guys.
I've got a very good buddy who's a Wiz fan, Ross, and shout out to him. I want you to have Cooper Flag, Ross, and all people in the DC area. I am rooting for Cooper Flag to go there, so don't get mad at me.
Ross, an hour and 30 minutes in, I don't want you to get Cooper Flag. I want one more year of struggle, but I promise it will be to your benefit, because Bilal Coulibaly will jump up to 12 drives per game, and then you're going to be looking at French Kawhi Leonard in no time. That's like our ESPN
Yeah.
5-second take. Right, the
Kawhi,
aperitif.
you know? There you go. Yeah.
Lovely. The aperitif for this podcast is Mohamed Gay, Mo Gay, out of Atlanta. He is my final pick for this, and he is a guy that has jumped into the rotation in the final 20 to 25 games or so for the Hawks. And I went back and I've watched a few of his better games. I watched him against the Bucks twice. I watched him against the Kings as well. And he is a second-year player out of Washington State, who I believe that's where your beloved Jalen Wells played as well last year.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
He to me just represents this really fun archetype bet who is already sort of fielding sort of positive results on the court, even if it's in Mickey Mouse March. But a 7'3" wingspan, 9'2" standing reach, 6'10" player that has not played at the 5 yet this year. And he's sort of just stuffing all of this size on the court and asking him to shoot corner threes. So it's one of those more like interesting player where I look at the Hawks and I see Onyeka Okongwu is probably going to be the 5. You're always going to be at a little bit of a size deficiency with Trey at the 1. What do? We just pretty much put a second center at the power forward and we trust in this skill development to come where Gay is like this really interesting mix of physical tools and a little bit of shooting touch. I'm not telling you that he's going to be an all NBA player anytime soon, but as like this sort of funky role player bet who has had a really, really positive end to the season and will perhaps feature again next year at the start of the season as opposed to the end. He's a player that has sort of recovered from injury issues as well. He's one of those players that I wish more teams sort of took the gamble on, where it's a second round pick, it's a toolsy player, you're chucking him in, and it's heralding good results because he's quite like a futuristic NBA role player as opposed to your catch and shoot 6'5" guy that's in the corner.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think when you're mentioning them being at an inherent size disadvantage with Trey,
Yeah.
the Gay and Okongwu would be sort of like the dime store Mobley and Allen. Obviously, I'm not like actually comparing them to those two, but in terms of how you would want to structure your team to cover for an undersized guard, you would want to have essentially 2 centers to juice that rim protection as much as you possibly can. And then have like a series of wings, which they have in, Mann and Risache and Daniels and all that stuff, to handle those other perimeter assignments and cover for him out there. I'm not really hating on the theory. It's just Jalen Johnson is their starting 4. And if you're going to start Jalen Johnson at 3, then you are moving either Risache or Daniels to the bench. And so I don't really see that happening. I can see them featuring Gay off of the bench. And if you want to try to view him as sort of like he's not Naz Reid as an offensive player, but in terms of that 6th man, that jumbo 6th man that really wins his minutes, then I could see maybe trying to project him that way. The shooting is going to have to really stick, like really, really stick. And I looked at Gay a little bit as well. And he has hit his corner threes. It's just hard. I want to see him in the play-in. And if my beloved Buzelis doesn't get into a playoff series, I'd like to see Gay get in one to see how teams treat him and how he does. Since Jalen Johnson's going to be hurt regardless. But yeah.
Zoom out. Mohamed Gay is a mere blip, a flicker on the NBA stock exchange right now. For this to be a positive bet, this is your dime store find. This is just he's an 8th man. Next year he's 2025 Chris Boucher. I am not expecting
okay. Hey,
the whole NBA to change.
Sell me. Yeah. Be more aggressive. He's going to get 25 minutes a game in the playoffs. It's going to go 7 games. He's going to be a beast. He could.
I can't betray Jalen Johnson. Jalen Johnson, who we spoke about last year, who was on track to make his first All-Star game this year. I think minutes will be hard to come by. I just wonder if they move on from Capella, they don't draft a big this year. Can Gay get in on those backup 5 minutes as well and sort of cobble together 18 minutes a game? Interestingly, in the games that I watched, because he was on the floor with Onyeka Okongwu, he wasn't guarding 5s, but he ate Kyle Kuzma's lunch, which was really, really funny. He was swallowing him up at the rim. He was absorbing all the contact on drives as well. It's like, if we're looking to dump our stock quickly, I'll just wait for the Milwaukee games next year. And Gay can just get like this little bump and we'll move on. But no, I'm not expecting displacing number 1 pick Zachary Risacher or future All-Star Jalen Johnson. This is 2020's Chris Boucher for me.
You sent me sort of some on-off propaganda for Gay, and his on-offs, like, it's a much smaller sample because it's really just been the last like 6 weeks that he's played. But the on-offs are very positive, and I looked a bit more into it. When he and Okongwu share the floor and Trae Young is off the floor, they're outscoring opponents by 57 points per 100 in 35 minutes. So like there's some noise, I think, in those numbers, but look, the numbers are the numbers. So
that's what we're selling on the phone in our Wolf of Wall Street, like penny stocks.
Exactly.
Chuck, I hope you've got 5 minutes. I've got a diamond of a stock for you today. Have you heard of Mo Gay? He's a plus 9.3 when he's on the court this year in 464 minutes. You've got to put your house on him, man. This guy's going to take you all the way to the top. I think we've got to that stage where at least I'm getting that little bit delirious. Chuck, have you got any closing thoughts for our potential investors as we part this pod and we part the regular season? We're heading into the postseason, baby.
I've got to head out, but I will say invest in the drop step, invest in drop don't stop, invest in Jack Quantrill. You're the man, baby. You are the ultimate. I'm not even saying buy low because I think you're worth more than that now, but you are headed to the moon. Thank you again for having me.
Chuck, same here. I will see you out in Vegas. I will buy you a drink or two. We'll hit the blackjack tables or something like that. We'll hit the Thomas and Mack Center because Summer League is coming after this postseason. But enjoy the postseason. Enjoy Chuck and Darts. Enjoy the draft coverage from Chuck as well. He's one of the very best out there. It is a pleasure to have him on the pod whenever he will join me. And I will continue to bug him for as long as I do the Drop Step podcast because he is one of the best guests out there. Go and check out his stuff. Subscribe to the Drop Step. Enjoy the postseason. This has been another episode of the NBA Stock Exchange. We'll see you again next year.